G'day ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to War Thunder with Mags, and welcome to the War Thunder 1.85 Dev Server 1, and today we're going to be taking a look at missiles, and probably some of the new jets as well. So, let's do this a little in reverse today, with the conclusion first. Gaijin has actually done a really good job with these missiles. I mean, they're bad, but they're bad in a good way, they're bad in a realistic way, they're actually very well done. So, yeah, they're surprisingly accurate, and exactly what I would expect from early gen missiles, and how I would expect them to function inside of War Thunder, so this is fantastic. But before we go into what has been done right, I do want to cover one small thing that I don't like, and it's, well, even that sounds a little bit harsh, it's the UI and the feedback for missile launch. Now, as you can see on screen, when you select a missile to fire, you get a little white ring that shows up around your target reticle. This in itself is not a major problem. It's actually very similar to what the bore sight on a reflector sight on one of these early jets would have looked like for a missile launch, so that's fine. Now, as you hold it over the target and it starts to attempt to track, it flashes. Just flashes on and off, and once it finally gets a lock, it turns solid red, and at that point you can fire the missile. Prior to that, you cannot release a missile at all, and the missile will then attempt to track and perhaps hit the target, perhaps miss. As it should. But that's all you get. Now, real-world infrared guided missiles have a very telltale growl. It sounds like this. This is an audio feedback to let the pilot know what status the missile is at without actually having to look at anything. This is a fairly small thing I would have thought to add, but it's completely not present in War Thunder, so there's just an element of feedback that I would have liked from the UI that's not there. So that really covers that, and that also covers exactly how the launch systems and the target selection and acquisition actually works for the missiles, so I've covered that as well. So moving on to mechanics. Now, a couple of days ago I did a video covering a simplified version of exactly how IR missiles from this time period actually function, and how I expected them to work inside of War Thunder based on how War Thunder's mechanics work. And this was quite deliberate, because it means now that is my mechanics video, and I can just refer back to that when I'm talking about the systems for these missiles. So if there's at any point anything you don't understand here, go watch that video and then come back. So, my first worry about Gaijin's IR missiles was always aspect ratio. As I mentioned in that video from a few days ago, early IR missiles were always rear aspect only. That is to say, you could only get a lock on an aircraft from the rear, with the seeker head having a direct line of sight to the target's engine. Gaijin have actually modelled this. It's still possible to lock an aircraft from the front, but I've only had it happen once, and at the time that it happened, the stabler in question was so close I thought it was about to climb into my cockpit and volunteer to be my Rio. In most cases, you'll want to be within about 3 to 3.5 kilometers to the rear, 25 to 30 degrees off the target tail's aircraft to get a launch indicator to even fire, which is pretty much exactly what you would expect, so well done. Now, the second part was of course missile tracking, and Gaijin have done a remarkably good job there as well. Once a missile launches, there's a small phase where the missile will move away just from the aircraft in a straight line as it's going through its initial acceleration, and then it will begin to track the target. If you're too close to the target during that initial acceleration phase, the missile will lose track and it'll just fly off into the sky. If you are at an acceptable range, the missile will begin to track and turn on the target, however it will not do sharp turns. This means breaking a lock is simply one sharp bank away and you manage to evade the missile. Also, if you change aspect against the missile once it's launched, the missile will lose track, so that has been modelled as well. And more than that, the tracking speed of the sensors in the seeker head seems to have been modelled, or at least taken into account as well. Even without hard braking and hard evasive manoeuvres, just throwing the aircraft into a wide barrel roll that exceeds around 11 degrees per second will cause the missile to lose track as well, as you exceed the tracking capability of the sensor inside the seeker head. So that has been taken into account, and it makes evading these missiles really easy. In fact, these missiles are a pain in the ass to use against anything that's not flying in a straight line. Maximum range of about 4 to 5 kilometers seems to be right. Now, I haven't had a chance to play with any players. There was very few people on the dev server when I was on, and I was unable to get a flight or organize a group. So I wasn't able to test whether or not altitude will affect the maximum range of the missiles, but at the very least, in standard combat, altitude for altitude, the missile range is pretty much accurate. The locking speed for the missiles, however, is a little bit slow. or the time that it takes a sensor to get on track. The time that it takes a sensor to get on track for an IR missile should, in reality, be less than 2 seconds. It gets out to 3 or 4. But I think Gaijin's fudged the numbers here for gameplay purposes, so people can't just snapshot off missiles. And surprisingly, I'm actually kind of okay with that. It doesn't really make too much of a difference, and it feels fine. One of the things I was very surprised that Gaijin actually took the time to model was the G-limits for missile launch. Now, again, this is something I didn't mention in the previous video, as I was focusing entirely on the missile's capabilities, but the aircraft themselves cannot fire one of their missiles if they are exceeding around 2G in a turn. So the firing aircraft and the target aircraft have to be relatively stable and flying relatively straight at the time that the missile is released. Exceeding 2Gs is actually really easy to do in all of the 3 current missile-carrying aircraft in War Thunder. Now, the target tracking itself, and this is great, because this is exactly what it should be like, but at the same time I was told after I left the dev server that apparently Gaijin actually turned off friendly fire as a result of this in RV matches. Infrared missiles are kind of like torpedoes once they're fired. They don't have IFF, they only see hot and not hot, and will track whatever they're aimed at. Now, if you aim it at something, and that something was to suddenly disappear by changing aspect, for example, but there is something else hot there, the missile will shift to the second hot thing and start tracking it, even if it's a friendly aircraft. Even experimenting in just a custom battle with bots, just to test and nut out exactly how well the missiles are performing, I managed to get 7 friendly fire kills simply by the AI banking off, breaking away, and having the missile pick up an allied aircraft that was attempting to follow it, then promptly getting the kill. I really hope Gaijin doesn't turn off friendly fire on the live release of this patch, because with War Thunder's tendency to generate lemming trains behind particular targets, and the fact that everybody is going to be spamming these missiles, the number of friendly fire kills is going to be absolutely incredible, and I actually want to see this happen. I'm sorry if I'm coming across as a little bit of a troll here, but I laughed my ass off every single time I accidentally splashed a bot, and I want to see this happen with players. This might be the one thing that finally teaches players not to lemming train onto targets. So, who has the best missiles? Now, initially, I was probably going to set my comment section on fire, because I was going to say the Russians do, but in hindsight, looking over the video, I actually think they're all about the same. Now, having said that, I did get consistently better results, more hits, more splashes, out of the Mk.II and the Javelin over the F-100, but I don't think that's got anything to do with the missiles. The F-100 is a much twitchier aircraft. It rolls a little bit as you're trying to turn, it's constantly jittering around while you're trying to maneuver onto a target. It doesn't particularly like to maneuver, whereas the Javelin and the Mk.XIX were significantly more stable during flight. I think the reason why I was getting such poor results out of the Sidewinders in comparison to the R3s and the Firestreaks was simply the aircraft that I was launching from. I think the F-100 was actually throwing off the missile locks. So yeah, I'd call them very similar to even. What about the aircraft themselves? Well, the F-100 is not the fastest plane and is the fastest plane in the game at exactly the same time. The F-100 is incredibly fast under afterburn, but it will not hit its maximum speeds unless you get up to 25,000 feet plus and really open up the throttles. Then it will haul ass. It's also surprisingly slow in acceleration, but it bleeds a lot of energy in turns. In fact, it dumps energy in any kind of maneuver whatsoever. It's very easy to go from 1,000 kilometers an hour to below 600 kilometers an hour very, very, very quickly in that aircraft. And it does not handle particularly well at below 600 kilometers an hour. The MiG on paper is slightly slower, but at the altitudes that War Thunder actually engages in combat, it's faster. It performs better at the combat altitudes that we are used to for War Thunder, and it is much more stable in the turns. It still dumps energy in the turns, just not quite as quickly as the F-100 does. The Javelin is interesting. It suffers some pretty severe issues. If you're trying to max out at straight line speed and using the engine overheat, you will fuel out if you use the engine overheat for too long. Any negative Gs will also cause the fuel reservoirs to run dry momentarily, shutting down your engines. Bring the aircraft out of a dive to 1,100 kilometers per hour in the overspeed warning area and let it sit there for longer than 10 seconds without slowing down, and you will rip its wings off. And while it's on par with the F100 starting from a low speed in regards to acceleration, the F100 doesn't accelerate particularly quickly at slower speeds, it is the slowest top speed, it is the slowest maximum dive speed, it is the lowest climb rate by virtue of not having a particularly high speed, and it is the slowest turning of the 3 aircraft in question. But it has the highest flat turning energy retention of the 3 aircraft. In fact, it is capable of accelerating in a flat turn, while both the MiG-19 and the F100 will drastically drop energy and slow down in any kind of tight maneuvering. Once you get the Javelin up to around 600 kilometers an hour, it just kinda wants to stay there regardless of what you do. You just sit at 100% throttle, and you just turn on targets as you need to, disengage when you want to, take altitude when you can, use dive speed to push yourself up to 800, 900, even 1,000 kilometers an hour in order to run down a target, and then you can break off into turns, no problems whatsoever. In turns, it will not rip its wings. The MiG will. More than 2 to 3 seconds at 11G sustained turn in the MiG will tear the wings straight off the aircraft. The Javelin, however, can keyboard turn at maximum speed and has absolutely no problems with that whatsoever. So there is that working for it. And played right, you can probably make the Javelin work if people around you were making mistakes or were distracted. In a straight up fight, pilot for pilot, the Javelin is definitely the worst of the 3 aircraft, but it is not as horrible as it appears on paper. I actually kind of enjoyed flying. And back to the F100, it's actually the fastest in turning of the 3. It's the most maneuverable. It can't do it for an extended period of time, but from a high energy position, 800, 900, 1,000 kilometers an hour, it can damn near snap turn back on top of itself. It is incredibly fast in the turn, but it'll blow nearly 50% of its speed in the process of doing it. So you'll get one massive high speed turn, and then you've got to start gaining energy back. And as I said, from a lower speed, the F100 doesn't accelerate as well as you think it would. It takes a bit to get up. Its optimal acceleration range seems to be beyond 800 kilometers an hour. Once you're up around there, if you hit the afterburner, the thing hauls ass. But from 500, 600 kilometers an hour, it's very slow to drag itself up to speed, unless you put it into a dive and use gravity as an assist to actually get that speed back. But anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for watching. That is my opinions on what I've seen on the dev server at this point. The missiles are not horrible, they're not going to break the game. They are very good if used correctly. Using them correctly is incredibly difficult, and it does require that the person you're shooting at be a little bit distracted, not paying attention, not realizing missiles coming his way. They are easy to avoid if you happen to have the situational awareness on. Our 3 new jet fighters are all fun and fantastic to fly. I've enjoyed flying all 3 of them. I'm reserving judgment on exactly how well they perform in the game until we've actually had an opportunity to put them onto the live server and test them against real opponents. That being said, in my opinion, the MiG-19 is the pick of the bunch. It is going to kick some serious ass. The F100 is not going to be bad by any means either. It's just going to take a little bit of effort to learn not to turn or bank unnecessarily, so you're not dumping that energy. The Javelin, I think, is going to be fine, at least for the moment. It's only 9.7 battle rating at this point, so it's a little bit lower than the battle rating 10s as it should be. Some might argue it's a little bit high, as it only performs by along the lines of the current battle rating 9 aircraft. That being said, we only have these 3 new planes, so it's going to be predominantly fighting battle rating 9 aircraft. In fact, the British are likely to be teamed up with the Americans on a fairly regular basis. So it's not going to be going up against the F100 and the MiG-9 all the time. It's mostly going to be going up against battle rating 9 planes, where it performs quite the equivalent. In fact, it performs better than most of them, and it has guided missiles. So I think it'll be good for the moment. It is probably going to suffer when more planes are added. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for watching. As always, remember to click that like button, share and subscribe if you would like to see more, and until next time, fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies.